Merry Christmas, everybody. This weekend's UFC is the first UFC event of this holiday season. We've got some amazing fights to look forward to this December. I really appreciate you watching my videos this year. I know they're often uploaded late. I know they're not edited or the most polished. I know I'm not the best at delivering breakdowns, right? I ramble a lot. I repeat myself a lot. So I know my videos aren't always the best or the easiest to watch. But the fact there's so many of you come here every week to watch my content, it really does mean a lot. And I say so many of you, obviously I'm quite a small YouTube channel compared to a lot of the channels out there, and that's another reason why I really appreciate you watching my stuff, because there's so many people that do breakdown videos and analysis and things like that for the UFC. So the fact out of everyone you guys choose to watch me, it means a lot. Don't think I don't appreciate it. Don't think it goes unnoticed. I really wish I could get these breakdown videos posted earlier in the week. I know it would be, much better for you guys. You get more time to watch the video. It's just that this fight research takes so much damn time that it's always until the end of the week by the time I've researched the fights, to a level that I feel I could talk about them in a lot of depth. So I really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for watching me. And Christmas is the season of giving, right? So it's time I give some free shit away, I think. Hopefully to those of you that have been watching me, religiously every week for many years now. And, hopefully those of you that have been watching me for a long time are the real ones that kind of watch these intros and stuff as well. So the first thing I want to do is give away a bunch of free access to my live betting tips for the whole of December. I can't promise anything. Don't know if we're going to make money. Don't know if we're going to make a profit. You never know what's going to happen in sports betting. But as you can see from our profitability chart, we perform really well live betting the UFC, and we make a profit most months. So if you'd like to get free access to my live betting service for the whole of December, so you can live bet the amazing card we've got this weekend, as well as that excellent pay-per-view card coming up in a couple of weeks between Leon Edwards, or headlined by Leon Edwards or Colby Covington, just drop me an email, info@mmabettingtips.com. You'll find my email address in the description below. Send me an email and we'll get you set up free access for the whole of December, so you can see what it's like. The live bets are broadcast through an audio stream, so you'll hear me kind of commentating the fight from a betting perspective as it's taking place. And when decent live bets pop up, decent in-play bets pop up, obviously I'll call them out, and then you can lock them in on your own betting sites. Like I say, we make a profit most months. Over the last sort of 2 years, since 2021, we've made a profit on 75% of fight night cards. Our win rate is a bit lower on pay-per-views. So yeah, if you watch every UFC event live, you might get some value out of that. I think you'll like it. But it doesn't stop there. Wait, there's more. I want to give more stuff away. Really appreciate you guys, and I want to give out as much stuff to you guys as possible. So I'm also going to be giving away 5 free passes to my football betting tips for the month of December. So the way my football bets work is they start at the beginning of the month, run through till the end of the month, and the passes to my football betting tips go month to month. So we're right at the beginning of December now, so I want to give 5 free passes away to this. The football bets are broadcast or communicated a little bit differently. They're sent out via Telegram, because you get longer to lock in the football bets. They're all live bets, so you get a few minutes usually to lock in a football bet, whereas with UFC live betting you have to be much quicker, which is why we use an audio stream. So if you like that, again, email me, info@mmabettingtips.com. The first 5 people to send me an email get you get access to football betting, basically. And might give some more away in the next video as well. So come back for next week's video. The reason why I can't give tons away is because obviously the more people in the group, the more of an impact it can have on the odds. So I would love to give everyone access watching this video, but obviously if I had like a few hundred people in the group or a few thousand people, even an extra 20, 30, 40, 50 people can make a difference. So I need to kind of always manage the numbers so that the odds don't get destroyed on everything that I recommend betting. So we'll start off with 5, see what impact that has on the odds this week. If it doesn't have much of an impact, we'll do more next week. So send me an email, info@mabettingtips.com, or you can find it in the description below. With that, let's now get into breaking down this fantastic fight night card, where we're going to be taking a deep dive into each of these main card fights from a betting perspective. And I'm really looking forward to this weekend's card. I think it's brilliant. I think the matchmaking on this card's fantastic. And in this YouTube video, we've got some really juicy fights to dig into. So I hope you're going to get a lot of value out of this video. If you do, please hit the like button, and it would help pump the video to more people. Get me some more views. I'd really appreciate that. And subscribe if you haven't already. And that will also help the channel grow. And I really appreciate it. So let's get into the first fight that I want to break down today, which is going to be the main card, or main event of the main card, which is Tsarukyan versus Beneil Dariush. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Tsarukyan is the favourite at average odds of around 1.33, which is going to be minus 303 for an implied probability of 75%. If we take a look at the odds on Dariush, he's around an average of, say, 3.35, which is going to be plus 235 for an implied probability of 30%. So, Tsarukyan, 27 years old, 5'7", with a 72.5-inch reach, and Dariush, 34 years old, 5'10", with a 72-inch reach. So, pretty big age gap in this fight, 7 years, which statistically gives Tsarukyan around about a 65-67% chance of winning. And even though we can see that Dariush is a little bit taller than Tsarukyan, I think one of the things that makes Tsarukyan so good is that he's got that long wingspan for his frame, which means he's got actually the slight reach advantage over Dariush. Nothing major though. So if we just pull up the results database for our pre-fight bets, obviously last week we locked in a 2-unit bet on Tsarukyan. And his odds have declined since then. We can see if we go to the odds movement chart, they've just been steadily trending down. And for everyone that bet him in this odds range, congrats to you, because I think he's an incredible bet, in this odds range. Obviously, I don't bet on big favourites in MMA very often. It's quite rare I bet on big favourites. If you look at our results, we don't. I mean, the last time we bet on a big favourite was Miranda Maverick, all the way back at UFC 291, back in the summer. So we haven't bet a big favourite in MMA since the summer. It's not something I like to do very often, but every once in a while, a matchup comes along that is so favourable for one fighter that I just have to pull the trigger. And so Tsarukyan kind of fits that criteria for me for the reasons I'll explain in this video. Would I still bet him now in this odds range, 1.33? Probably not. Probably not. I think he was just close enough to like 1.40 minus 250 for me to bet him, in this odds range. Probably a little bit too short for me now. Having said that, I do think it is extremely unlikely that Tsarukyan will lose this weekend for the reasons that I'll describe in this video. Obviously, that's a pretty good opportunity for me to also, celebrate a little bit of the good work that we've been doing this year, because it's been an absolute phenomenally good year for pre-fight betting. If we just take a little screenshot here. So back in... when was it? Back in like June, July of 2022, when I made a big adjustment to my pre-fight betting strategy. Wasn't sure if it was going to work, because I was kind of going against the grain a little bit, and doing things in a way that you don't really hear many people talk about doing. But it's paid off big time, because if we look at our performance on pre-fight bets since I did make an adjustment to this strategy, you can see just an amazing uptrend here, where we've been steadily grinding out profits now for the last 18 months, to the extent that we've only had 2 losing months in the whole of 2023, back in June and right at the beginning of the year in February. So, this period here where we were floating around break even was a period where we were just struggling to make ground. And so I analysed my results over this period of time, found some trends, found some, types of bets which were costing me money, and, types of bets we were losing on frequently. And then also found some bets I was performing really well on, and I just stopped betting the kind of bets that were consistently costing me money, doubled down on the kind of bets that were consistently winning, and then we can see the results. We've just had a really, really good year on pre-fight bets in 2023. Absolute phenomenal year. And hopefully Tsarukyan can keep that going for us by helping us bank another win this weekend. Obviously, our last pre-fight bet was on Lupita Godinez to beat Tabitha Ricci. And the reasoning behind the bet on Tsarukyan is pretty much the same as the reasoning for the bet on Lupita Godinez. And actually, to some extent, also pretty much the same reasoning for the bet on Jacqueline Buckley to beat Alex Morono as well. It's one of those fights where, when you consider how both guys match up stylistically, it's actually very rare you get a fight like this in MMA. But it's one of those fights where stylistically, I just think Tsarukyan is better than Dariush everywhere. He's like 30 to 40 to 50% better than Dariush in every single aspect of MMA, apart from probably pure Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We know that Beneil Dariush is a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but Arman Tsarukyan's takedown defense, defensive wrestling, ability to scramble back to his feet, submission defense, all of that is so good that I don't feel that Dariush's advantages in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are going to have that much of an impact on this fight. So if we start off by covering off the intangibles and the areas there that Tsarukyan's got the edge, then we can go through this stylistically and talk about, where the fight could take place and what edges Tsarukyan has standing up and on the ground. So straight away, a massive part of the reasoning for this bet is the fact that it's a 5-rounder. And while Dariush is a lot more experienced than Tsarukyan, he's generally competed at a higher level of opponent for longer. He's had big fights. For me, in this matchup, Tsarukyan is far more battle-tested than Dariush, which I understand is a strange thing to say. But if we look at Dariush's record, and we go through all of his fights, we'll just bring up all of them, right? Or all of them over the last few years. You can see that he's never been in a 5-rounder, right? 3 rounds, 3 rounds, 3 rounds, 3 rounds, 3 rounds, 3 rounds, 3 rounds. Never been in a 5-rounder. Now, Tsarukyan doesn't have a lot of experience being in 5-rounders either, but we have seen him go 5 hard rounds against Mateusz Gamrot in a fight that was contested at an absolutely insane pace. Both Gamrot and Tsarukyan sprinted for that full 25 minutes. And so for me, we know that Tsarukyan's got the capability to go hard for 25 minutes because we've seen him do it. Whereas one thing that has kind of held Dariush back in his UFC career is the fact that Dariush has got a tendency to slow down as fights wear on. Now, Dariush slows a lot in 3-minute fights. I can only imagine how much he's likely to slow down in 25-minute fights. So cardio is certainly an area where Tsarukyan's got a big edge here. And he's younger, right? He's the younger, more athletic man. At Dariush's stage in his career, close to 30 pro fights, 34 years old. He's getting quite old for a lightweight. He's been in a lot of wars. We've seen him knocked out a few times. He's had some bad injuries. There's a lot of wear and tear on his body. Whereas Tsarukyan, he's a young, hungry bull. Should be making big improvements from fight to fight. Now, another reason why I really like Tsarukyan in this matchup, before we even get into how they match up stylistically, and to be fair, this next factor is more important than anything else I'm going to say in this breakdown. This next factor is the primary reason why I'm betting Tsarukyan this weekend. The thing that I really like about Tsarukyan in this fight is the pace that he fights at. what's particularly concerning about Beneil Dariush is if you go and look at his past fights, his output is quite low. So what you'll generally see from Dariush is he will throw one big singular power punch, or one big singular power kick, or he'll commit very hard to a takedown. But he's not the kind of guy to pepper you with volume strikes or to persistently grapple or spam takedowns. He will attack you, and when he attacks you, he's very dangerous. But he will ebb and flow between going hard and easing off, and going hard and easing off. And when he's easing off, he's in a defensive shell, and his pace is very slow. And if any time in his career, or any time in his UFC career, we've seen Dariush go hard for an extended period of time in terms of, maybe he gets into a ton of big exchanges on the feet and throws a high volume of strikes, or perhaps there's a lot of back and forth grappling where he's having to scramble like crazy and defend takedowns and get his own takedowns. Whenever we see Dariush in a period of action such as what I've just described, generally speaking, you do see Dariush gas out quite quickly. Whereas Tsarukyan, we've seen involved in very intense, very high-paced matchups against guys like Islam Makhachev, Mateusz Gamrot. And sure, he might get a bit tired. He got a bit tired in the 4th and 5th rounds of the Gamrot fight. But the pace that this guy is able to go at is just insane. And it's not, just from watching their past fights, Dariush is not going to be able to keep up with that pace. You never know what's going to happen in MMA. Maybe Dariush shows up and looks completely different this weekend. But based on past performances, Dariush cannot match the pace that Tsarukyan fights at. He can't scramble and grapple and go as hard on the ground with Tsarukyan as Gamrot and Makhachev could. And he can't keep up with the volume of strikes that Tsarukyan throws either. So when we are breaking down how these two match up, standing up and on the ground, it's not so much about how they match up from a technical point of view. It's more about Dariush not being able to match Tsarukyan's output. And that's really why I think Tsarukyan is a really good bet in this fight. Because I just don't see Dariush having enough output to outpoint Tsarukyan in 3 of the 5 rounds. Maybe Dariush starts strong, wins some of the early rounds. Maybe he nicks around with a flash knockdown, or maybe he catches Tsarukyan in a bad position on the ground, nicks around. I could see that happening. But to outwork Tsarukyan in 3 out of the 5 rounds, it's going to be very difficult. And occasionally we see fights with this dynamic, lead to improbable outcomes, right? A recent fight I can think of was the title fight between Brandon Moreno and Alexandre Pantoja, where it was quite clear towards the end of round 2 Pantoja was getting very tired, but just through certain mistakes Moreno made and Pantoja being very opportunistic and capitalizing, Pantoja was still able to nick 3 of those 5 rounds and win a close decision, even though he was very tired at the end of round 2. MMA is a chaotic, unpredictable sport where improbable things can happen from time to time, but what you generally want to do is deal in most likely outcomes and stay on the side of most likely outcomes. And while it's possible that Dariush could, find a way to steal 3 rounds from somewhere, it's not very likely. Because if the fight stays on the feet, Dariush will land the odd massive body kick and the odd big right hand. He's got power in his hands, he's got devastating kicks. But it's going to be very, very difficult for him to match the volume of Tsarukyan. Tsarukyan's an absolute buzzsaw. He fights at a very high pace. And if the fight goes to the ground, again, Dariush, very high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, dangerous submission game, heavy grappling, very strong grappling control. But we've seen in the Makhachev and the Gamrot fights, not only is Tsarukyan's takedown offense amazing, but he's also virtually impossible to hold down, right? The Gamrot fight really showed this. Every time Gamrot would get him down, within 30 seconds to a minute, Tsarukyan was able to work his way back up to his feet. And on top of that, he's very difficult to control because of how scrambly he is. And we really saw that in the Makhachev fight. And personally, Makhachev, for me, significantly stronger grappling control than Dariush. And while, to be fair, Dariush does have stronger grappling control than Gamrot, what Gamrot does a lot better than Dariush is persistently grapple and chain wrestle. And Gamrot's takedown entries are a lot better than Dariush's as well. So I just see Tsarukyan being able to outwork Dariush wherever the fight takes place, standing up or on the ground. And the fight probably will be close early. Dariush probably will have some early success because he's very good on the ground, dangerous striker. But I think those later rounds, the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, I think are going to be pretty rough for Dariush if past performances are anything to go by. So that's why I think Tsarukyan's a good bet. Obviously, we bet him last week when his odds were a lot better than they are now. Yeah, what date actually did we bet Tsarukyan? I remember posting it in Discord, in the Discord group. Let me see, what date was it? Take a look, take a look, take a look. 21st of November. So that was 9 days ago. So yeah, his odds have declined a bit more in the last 9 days, and I think they're going to carry on to decline as well as people start to do their parlays and stuff on fight day. Tsarukyan is going to be an obvious one that most people probably throw in. So if you do want to bet Tsarukyan in some way and you haven't yet, I would recommend doing it because, as you can see, or doing it as soon as possible, as you can see, his odds are just continuing to trend down. And I can understand why. It's a very difficult fight for Dariush. But you never know, man. You never know. MMA's a crazy sport. Maybe he catches Tsarukyan with something crazy. Alright, let's look at the over-under on this one. And we'll refresh this as well to make sure we got the latest odds. The over 2.5 rounds is set at 1.50 minus 250. Do you know what? 12.5 minutes is an eternity in a cage fight to the death, but I do think it's quite likely this fight goes deep. Both these guys are so tough and so well rounded that I think it is quite likely this matchup will go into the 3rd, the 4th and the 5th rounds. Because MMA is such a crazy chaotic sport, I don't love the odds on the over 2.5 rounds, so I won't be betting in myself, but I do think this fight more than likely goes quite deep, and I think it'll be pretty competitive early on as well. Just gone a little bit out of focus. Let me fix that real quick. A little bit blurry. Is that better? No, sorry about this, guys. There we go. That sharpened up a little bit. Alright, so in terms of prop bets for this one, so Tsarukyan to win by decision 3.0 plus 200. I think that's the most likely outcome. Oh no, wow, inside the distance. Even steeper odds. I personally think the most likely outcome on this fight is Tsarukyan wins inside the distance, just because I think, like I say, Tsarukyan pushes such a high pace that I think by the 4th or 5th round, Dariush will probably be too tired to defend himself, and then Tsarukyan will just get him out of there, just through, you know, ground and pound or something. But the odds on that are very steep. I wouldn't bet that. If these aren't things I'm going to be betting personally, but if you are the type of person that likes to sprinkle a little bit of money on every fight to make watching more interesting, Tsarukyan to win in round 4 at odds are like 14.0 plus 1,300. That's quite interesting to me. And so is Tsarukyan to win in round 5. Those bets aren't super likely to hit, but obviously with odds like that, you don't need to hit a particularly high percentage of your bets to earn a good profit long term. So I would consider Tsarukyan in rounds 4 and 5. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. If you did, please hit the like button and help pump this video to more people. After all, it's the season of giving, right? Now let's break down the next fight between King Bobby Green and Jalen Turner, who's all the way up here. Alright, so this is a very, very interesting fight. And it's becoming more and more interesting to me the longer I wait before making my decision on what I'm going to do with this matchup. So when I found out about this fight, because obviously, you know, Turner's coming in on short notice. Bobby Green was originally scheduled to face Dan Hooker. When I first found out about this fight, I absolutely loved the stylistic matchup for Jalen Turner, and I still do. And I think he wins a very high percentage of the time. And when Turner was about a 1.4 or minus 250 favourite, I was considering betting him at those odds. And I've waited, and his odds have just got consistently better. So this is one of those fights that I haven't made my mind up yet. I'm just going to sit back, see what happens, see how the odds move, and decide on whether or not I'm going to bet Jalen Turner close to the time of the fight, when the odds movement may slow a little. But Jalen Turner is very, very attractive to me here, for the reasons I'll describe in this video. Now, before... Actually, let's go through the tail of the tape, and let's talk a little bit about why I like Turner in this matchup. So the tail of the tape, right? Bobby Green, 37 years old, 5'10", with a 71-inch reach. Turner, 28 years old, 6'3", 75.5-inch reach. So some nice X factors there in favour of Jalen Turner. So he's 9 years younger than Bobby Green, which statistically gives him around about a 70% chance of winning, 7-0. And he's also got a 4.5-inch reach advantage, but Turner uses his reach very well. So even though 4.5 inches isn't a massive amount, or it's not a huge reach advantage, he's long, he's tall, and he fights very long. So that 4.5-inch reach advantage is accentuated. So straight away, Turner's got some not very nice X factors on his side, right? Age, height, reach. I don't like the Jalen Turners coming on short notice. It doesn't feel great betting on a relatively big favourite who's coming on short notice. However, Turner is a cardio machine. Never slows down. Cardio's always looked really good. We've seen him, you know, involved in some really high-paced fights. For me, Turner is the kind of guy that just seems to have genetically good cardio. So I'm not that worried about, like, him gassing out or anything in this fight. I don't think that's going to happen. Now, he slowed a little bit against Dan Hooker, but I think that was an adrenaline dump where he had Hooker hurt, couldn't get the finish, and then Hooker kind of caught him with some big shots and he panicked. But I wouldn't necessarily say that was due to cardio. That was just the emotion, the adrenaline of the fight. Generally speaking, Turner's got pretty good cardio, so I'm not overly concerned about what shape he's coming into this fight in. Now, I haven't watched Jalen Turner's Fight Week interviews yet. Someone in the Discord did send me a message yesterday with a video of Turner talking to MMA media, and I haven't watched that video yet, but I can't remember who sent me this message. I really apologise. You're probably watching this thinking it was me, dumbass. But whoever sent me that DM basically said there's some red flags with Turner in this video. So I'm obviously going to watch that video, and that the fact that I haven't had time to watch that video yet is one of the reasons why I haven't made up my mind on whether I'm going to bet Jalen Turner. So tomorrow, as I'm finishing off my research for this card, I'll watch all the Fight Week interviews, see if there's any red flags, anything like that. I think Turner said he felt pressured into taking this fight or something along those lines. Help me out. Let me know in Discord what's up with Turner, if there's any red flags with him. If you've already, you know, watched his Fight Week interviews, or let me know in the comments below. But yeah, I haven't watched those yet. But basically, based on how these two match up stylistically, I think this is a really good stylistic matchup for Turner. The reason why I think this is a really good stylistic matchup for Turner is because, really speaking, he's only got two weaknesses. His first weakness is his takedown defense, and his second weakness is the fact that he's a bit chinny. Those weaknesses can always be exploited by anyone in the UFC. But for me, with how they match up stylistically, Bobby Green isn't that well positioned to exploit them. Bobby Green isn't the kind of fighter who I think is going to make Turner pay for those big weaknesses that he's got. Because if we look at Bobby Green's skill set, he's not really a power puncher. Yes, we've seen him get the odd flash knockout here and there. He knocked Grant Dawson out in his last fight. But we're always going to see improbable, unlikely things happen when we're talking about cage fights to the death. And just like with the logic behind the Tsarukyan bet and the Lupita Godinez bet and the Jacqueline Buckley bet, we want to be only dealing in most likely outcomes. We don't want to worry about the random shit that happens every once in a while and let that affect our judgment. We want to be dealing only in most likely outcomes, only in probable outcomes. And even though Green has wobbled the odd guy here and there and has had the odd knockout here and there, generally speaking, Bobby Green is a volume striker that doesn't really have power in his hands. If you look at his record, he's an absolute decisionator. If you look at his wins, late submission win over, obviously, Tony Ferguson, who's on a very steep decline. Flash knockout of Grant Dawson, it happens in a cage fight to the death. Then we've got decision over Haskarat. Did get a knockout against Alaya Quinta. But then prior to that, decision. You get the idea, right? A lot of decisions. So, at the end of the day, a guy like Bobby Green that's had over 40 pro fights, he's going to have some knockout wins from time to time. But generally speaking, he's not a power puncher. He's a volume striker that likes to pump the jab out there, chip away at you with volume strikes and boxing combinations. He's not the kind of guy that really sits down hard on his punches and looks to knock you out, unless you're very unlucky and your name is Grant Dawson. Generally speaking, Bobby Green is the kind of guy that just wants to touch you, pick you apart, and chip away at you from behind the jab. Now, the size and reach of Turner will make it very, very difficult for Bobby Green to execute his usual style. Because generally what he likes to do is stand quite flat-footed and square to his opponent, stand right in front of them in boxing range, and use very good head movement and a very good ability to read his opponents to kind of roll with the punches, slip shots, and again, chip away at them with the jab. Stylistically, that makes Jalen Turner an absolute nightmare style for Green to deal with, because Green wants to fight you in a phone booth where he can land that jab. The problem with Turner, or the problem for Bobby Green when it comes to Turner, is that not only does Turner fight very long and use his length very well, but he's also got really good footwork and movement. So Turner's generally not the guy that's going to stand in front of you and fight in a phone booth, fight in boxing range, which is where Green wants to be. Turner's the kind of guy that will move around, use a lot of footwork and movement to chip away at you from a distance where he can use that length. Now, yes, my one knock on Turner is that at times he does get dragged into big exchanges, and that's one of the reasons why we've seen him get rocked, wobbled, and dropped so many times in his UFC fights. He does have a tendency to get sucked into a firefight. But generally speaking, that's less of a big deal with someone like Green that is more of a volume striker. And so the problem Green is going to have in this fight is that he's going to have to cover a lot of distance to get inside and land his boxing combinations. And generally he's not great at landing on moving targets. And generally speaking, he's also the kind of guy that is a little bit predictable and one-dimensional. How many times have we seen Bobby Green face a technical striker with good footwork and good movement, and they'll kind of dance around him and play the role of matador, and he'll follow him around the octagon talking trash, getting frustrated, telling him to stand and bang, talking shit, letting them jab him in the face in an effort to try and bait them into an exchange. And all that is really a front. All of that is really a cover for the fact that Green's not particularly good at cutting the cage off and landing strikes on someone that isn't going to stand right in front of him in boxing range. Green is a bit of a one-dimensional boxer, And if Turner doesn't play that game, if Turner uses his more diverse range of strikes, his kickboxing, his length, his footwork, his movement, so long as Turner doesn't get sucked into a firefight, I think he's going to outclass Bobby Green. And as much as there's X factors in Green's favour in terms of Jalen Turner, being a little bit chinny, taking the fight on short notice, there's also X factors in Turner's favour, which kind of negate those X factors in Green's favour, in the sense that Green's 9 years older, very, very old for a lightweight, 37 years old, very old. He's had over 40 pro fights. He should be declining from fight to fight. The irony is obviously he's looking better than ever these days. But Green should be declining from fight to fight. Father Time is undefeated. And the size and the reach of Turner will make it much more difficult for Green to have success when it comes to striking. Now, the other area of weakness that Turner's got is that his takedown offense is very bad. But again, even though Bobby Green is a pretty good wrestler, he's actually got a base in wrestling. It's very, very rare that you will see Bobby Green try to take someone down. And when I was doing the fight research for this matchup, obviously, my perception, my memory of the Tony Ferguson fight was that there was a lot of grappling in that matchup, and that Tony Ferguson was doing pretty well early on, and both of those things were true. When I went back and watched that fight, there was a lot of grappling, and Tony Ferguson was piecing Bobby Green up early in that matchup. And I was kind of concerned. I'd forgotten how the fight played out. I was kind of concerned for Turner, because I thought, you know what, if Bobby Green is fighting smarter these days, and he used the grappling heavy game plan against Tony Ferguson, maybe he'll do the same against Jalen Turner to exploit Jalen Turner's poor takedown defense. But when you go back and watch the Tony Ferguson fight, even though there was a lot of grappling in the matchup, it wasn't because Bobby Green was taking Ferguson down. It was just because Ferguson was getting knocked down or slipped or pulling guard off failed takedown attempts, things like that. And so Green was in top position beating him up just because Ferguson kind of took the fight to the ground and Green followed him there. It wasn't like Green was really initiating the grappling. So because of that, and the fact that we never see Bobby Green try and take his opponents down, I am far less concerned about Jalen Turner's takedown offense. On top of that, even though Turner's takedown offense is bad, he is getting a lot better at working his way back up to his feet when he gets taken down. And Bobby Green's not really a persistent grappler. So it's not like a Mateus Gamrot or an Arman Tsarukyan that is going to relentlessly spam takedowns and look to get Jalen Turner down. I think if Turner had a bit of success stepping takedowns and working his way back up to his feet, Bobby Green would probably forget about grappling anyway. So that's also not as big of an issue. So I do like Turner a lot in this fight. I think his size, his length, his footwork, his movement, his more diverse range of attacks, his kicking game, his youth, I think all that is going to give Bobby Green a lot of trouble in this fight. I haven't made my mind up if I'm going to bet Turner yet. Obviously, I will post in Discord if we do end up betting on... if we do end up betting on Turner, I will post in there and put out an announcement as soon as I can. But yeah, man, I just want to watch his fight week interviews. I want to see how his weight cut goes. I want to see the stare downs, because we know Turner's coming in on, really short notice. If at the weigh-ins tomorrow, he misses weight by 1 pound and looks like death on the scales, I'm not going to be feeling great about betting him on short notice as a big favourite. But if he comes in, makes weight no problem, looks great, towers over Bobby Green at the ceremonial weigh-ins, I'm a lot more likely to pull the trigger on Turner. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wait for the ceremonial weigh-ins. I'm going to wait for the weigh-ins on Friday. I'm going to watch the fight week interviews, and then I'll make my decision and I'll post it in Discord if I decide to pull the trigger, and obviously send an announcement out for you guys. So in terms of the over-under on this one, I do think it's reasonably likely this fight goes deep. Now, both guys do like to get into big exchanges, but Bobby Green's very durable. And so I see this fight going deep. If a finish were to come, I think it would be flash knockout, with Green flash knocking out Turner in the same way he did to Grant Dawson. But for the reasons I've explained, I don't think that's that likely. So I do think this fight is quite likely to go deep. Both guys have got good cardio. They're both quite tough. The odds aren't great though, so I'm not sure if I would bet that. Again, let me see how Turner looks at the weigh-ins, and then I will be a lot more confident in my picks for this fight. At the moment, I'm on the fence, because if Turner looks like shit coming out on short notice, it changes everything. So we need to wait and see what the weigh-ins are like. In terms of the props, Turner by decision is the most likely outcome in my opinion. 3.50 plus 250. The odds aren't great, but if you're the type of person that wants to sprinkle a little bit of money on every fight to make watching it more interesting, that is the most likely prop to hit, I think, on this fight. So long as Turner looks reasonably good at the weigh-ins. But then even if he doesn't look great, I still think that's probably the most likely prop. So I hope you found that useful. Alright, now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is an absolutely brilliant fight between Rob Font and Deiveson Figueiredo. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Deiveson Figueiredo is the slight underdog at average odds of around 2.15, which is plus 115 for an implied probability of 47%. If we take a look at the odds on Rob Font, he's around an average of 1.74, which is going to be minus 135 for an implied probability of 57%. So Rob Font is 36 years old, 5'8", with a 71.5 inch reach. Deiveson Figueiredo, 35 years old, 5'5", with a 68 inch reach. And there are a couple of big X factors in this matchup, which I think can have a pretty big impact on how this fight plays out. So, I mean, where do we even begin? There's so much to talk about with the X factors on this fight. Okay, let's just look at their size first of all. Well, their size and the age, right? So, both of them are about the same age. They're both very old for the division. So, this fight's taking place in the bantamweight division. And we know that the lighter weight classes are all about speed, reflexes, and athleticism, which are some of the first things to go as you start to get older. So, while 36, 35 years old, respectively, isn't that old in the heavier weight classes, it really is in the lighter weight classes. And so I would expect both Figueiredo and Font to be declining a lot from fight to fight. Now, with Rob Font, we've had absolute confirmation of that, because to me it looks like his chin is completely gone. It doesn't take much to wobble him these days, and over his last few fights we've seen him get rocked, wobbled, dropped multiple times, which is never a good sign. With Figueiredo, I'm not sure if we've seen any kind of decline in Figueiredo. Didn't look great in his last fight, kind of capitulated very quickly when the fight wasn't going his way. But Figueiredo is also a guy at 35 years old who has obviously been killing himself for years now to make that 125 pound limit. It's probably taken some years off his career doing that. And I'd also expect Figueiredo to be declining a lot. Father Time is undefeated, and the fact that he's moving up to the bantamweight division for this matchup could be a sign that his body can't shed the weight like he used to down to the flyweight limit, and that could be like an early indicator that obviously Father Time's catching up with Figueiredo. On the other hand, it could be the fact that he's obviously lost a couple times to Brandon Moreno now, and feels perhaps his chance of getting a belt in the bantamweight division is better. Well, obviously I would disagree with that. Bantamweight is a shark tank compared to the flyweight division. Or maybe he's just thinking, you know, I can't compete with these young hungry bulls in the flyweight division anymore. I'm just going to go up to bantamweight, not put my body through the trauma of that brutal weight cut to the flyweight limit, and I'm just going to get some paydays at bantamweight instead without the brutal weight cuts. I think that's probably more likely what's going on here, because obviously, you know, the title picture at 135 pounds is probably, I mean, it's probably the biggest shark tank in the UFC, right? We've got some great divisions in the UFC with a lot of talent, but I can't think of many divisions more stacked than bantamweight right now. So I can't see Figueiredo breaking into the top 5, if I'm being brutally honest with you. I think someone like Sandhagen, Davashvili, Aljamain Sterling, Sean O'Malley, Peter Yan, I think those guys would absolutely destroy Figueiredo, and there's probably some guys I'm forgetting about as well. So Father Time, not good, particularly for Font, who's already shown signs of decline. Now, in terms of the size difference between these two, obviously Font is a natural bantamweight, 5'8" with a 71.5-inch reach. Figueiredo's moving up, so he's going to be a lot smaller at 5'5" with a 68.5-inch reach. Now, on paper, it's not a massive difference in size, but I am interested to see the ceremonial weigh-ins for this fight, the stare down, to see exactly how that size difference looks. Obviously, Figueiredo started life as a bantamweight. When he first came into the UFC, he was a bantamweight, so it's not like this is a completely new division for him. But Font could have a decent size advantage in this one. Which kind of brings me on to the first point that I think is important to discuss on this matchup. How do I even segue into this? So, this week, Figueiredo was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet. Because at slight underdog odds, it's always appealing to me when I see one guy that has this big weakness in his skill set. In Font's case, he's quite chinny. He's getting rocked, wobbled, dropped a lot at this point in his career. And when I see a fighter that has one very specific weakness that his opponent is very well positioned to exploit. Like, if we think about what defines Figueiredo, right? What he does best. I mean, the thing that Figueiredo does best is punch people really hard in the face, right? He's got big power. You know, we've seen him, look at the knockouts of Joseph Benavidez. He's even wobbled Brandon Moreno, which is something not many guys can claim to have done. This guy has got absolute nuclear bombs in his hands. So when you look at a guy like Font that's very chinny, he's getting rocked, wobbled, dropped in all of his fights over the last few years, and then you've got Figueiredo, who's a devastating power puncher, straight away I get really interested in the guy that's well positioned to exploit the other dude's weakness. And I am very tempted to bet Figueiredo this weekend, and this might be one of those fights that if I've got time on Saturday, I will research for a second time and potentially bet. Obviously, if I do end up betting Figueiredo, I will drop it into our Discord channel in the pre-fight bet section. So obviously I'll put on notifications if that happens. But Figueiredo is a fighter that I'm very, very tempted to bet this weekend. The reason why I haven't already pulled the trigger on Figueiredo is because I have a few big concerns with him where I don't feel super confident in him. And if you look at, if we go to our results, right, and we look at our pre-fight bets, we've already spoken about how amazing we're doing on pre-fight betting. I don't need to remind you guys, we've only had 2 losing months this year. We've done phenomenally well. And the reason why we've done so well is because we are being really disciplined in sticking to a rigid, strict betting strategy that we know is producing extremely good profits for us. And that strategy is only betting fighters where they have virtually no realistic path to victory. That doesn't mean they can't lose, right? In a cage fight to the death, anything can happen. You see a lot of chaos, flash KOs, injuries, all that kind of stuff, right? But the kind of fighters we're betting these days are the fighters that, unless something crazy happens, they're going to win a very high percentage of the time. And so we're overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour. When it comes to a guy like Dariush Figueiredo, there's so many ways that he could run into trouble in this fight that it doesn't really fit that criteria. And for that reason, I'm a lot more reluctant to bet him, because it would mean we'd have to deviate from our strategy that has been just working so well for us, in the last sort of 18 months. I mean, look at this. Since I changed my strategy here, we've just been printing ever since. And I don't want to kind of change a winning formula. And so the issues that I have with Figueiredo in this fight. So first of all, let's focus on the fact that he's well positioned to exploit Font's biggest weakness, right? Font's very chinny. Figueiredo hits very hard. We don't know if Figueiredo's power is going to carry up and be the same at bantamweight, right? Because the one thing that Figueiredo had over, or the one advantage Figueiredo had over almost every flyweight that he ever fought, was a big power and physicality and athletic advantage, right? He could just overwhelm these smaller flyweights with power and physicality. We don't know if that's going to transition up to bantamweight, because he's now going from being one of the most powerful, strong, physically imposing flyweights in the division, probably the most powerful physically imposing flyweights in the division, to one of the smallest bantamweights at only 5'5". So he's going to be very undersized for the division. So his knockout power might not carry up to a higher weight class. He might not be able to hurt these bigger bantamweights in the same way. Yes, he's still going to be a big, muscular, physically imposing dude, but it doesn't mean he's going to have the power now to like knock guys 6 feet across the octagon. So that's one concern I've got. I want to really see how his power translates up. And if Figueiredo's power doesn't translate up to the bantamweight division, I think he's really going to struggle on the feet with Rob Font, because he just isn't going to be able to match the volume that Font throws out there. Font is a high volume striker. He's got a great jab. He's got good boxing, good footwork, good movement. You know, he's been able to outstrike guys like Marlon Vera. You know, it was only the fact that he kept getting wobbled and dropped in the Vera fight that he lost the decision. But if you actually look at the striking stats, the numbers, Font outstruck Marlon Vera in almost every round, but again, it was his chin that let him down. So, if Figueiredo isn't able to hurt Font in this fight with his power, he's probably going to get outpointed and outworked on the feet relatively comfortably. Now, one other thing that could complicate this fight is that we know that Figueiredo's weight cut to flyweight is absolutely brutal, right? He looks like a skeleton on the scales. When we're assessing how Figueiredo and Font are going to match up on the feet in this fight, we're for the most part assessing Figueiredo at flyweight in 25-minute 5-round title fights. That's interesting for a couple of reasons. The first reason being, Figueiredo kills his body so much to get down to flyweight that it's possible that now that he's fighting at bantamweight where he doesn't have to go through the brutal weight cut, he's going to have a lot more energy against Rob Font this weekend. And without that brutal weight cut, it's possible that he could work a lot harder, exert a lot more energy, throw a much higher volume of strikes. So it is a little bit dangerous for me to use Figueiredo's past fights to assess whether or not he's going to be able to match Font's output, because Figueiredo's output in the bantamweight division might not be the same as Figueiredo's output in the flyweight division. So you've got to bear that in mind as well. The second factor is that Figueiredo's obviously been in the flyweight title picture for many years now. So the majority of his fights over the last 2-3 years have been 5-round, 25-minute title fights. And so it's possible that his output could have been quite low in those matchups because he's trying to pace himself over a longer 25-minute contest. This fight against Rob Font this weekend is obviously going to be a 3-rounder. So again, it's possible that Figueiredo's output could be much higher this weekend than we usually see from him, because he doesn't have to pace himself over 25 minutes. He's only got to exert energy for 15 minutes. So when I say that Rob Font, if the fight stays standing, will likely outpoint Figueiredo, again, it's not totally conclusive because we don't know how Figueiredo is going to look at bantamweight in a 3-round contest. So it's a very complex fight. I love breaking down fights like this. I love live betting fights like this. It's such a deep fight with so much to think about, and these are the kind of fights that I absolutely love, the really juicy ones with so many different layers, so many different elements to it. This is where you can really find an edge in live betting, just by understanding both guys on a very deep level, and then being able to process all the information, everything that's happening while the fight is taking place very quickly in your brain, to hopefully find, rock solid, profitable live bets. That's what my speciality is. So I love fights like this. So striking, based on past performances, if Font doesn't get knocked out, probably going to be a tough fight for Figueiredo, but we don't know how Figueiredo is going to look at 135. It is also worth noting that it's possible that Figueiredo could look even worse at £135 than he did at £125, only because at bantamweight he's going to be carrying a lot of extra weight, a lot of extra muscle mass, which could slow him down, could cause him to gas out a lot faster. So again, the reason why this is a very complex fight to break down is because there's so many things to think about, and whenever we bring up an area of this fight to analyse, it kind of branches off into different directions as to how things could play out, and based on past performances, we don't have a conclusive answer to, what is most likely to happen, because we haven't seen Figueiredo at bantamweight before, or at least in a very long time. So, in terms of how these two match up when it comes to grappling, I understand this might sound a little bit crazy, because Deiveson Figueiredo has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and for the most part Rob Font is just a kickboxer. But I actually think the easiest path for Rob Font in this fight would be to come in with a grappling heavy game plan. Now, I know there will be a lot of people rushing the Discord to call me an idiot for saying that, or rushing to leave a comment on YouTube, because technically Figueiredo's the grappler, technically Font is the striker, and I do understand that, and I also understand that Font got dominated on the ground in his last fight against Corey Sandhagen, and his grappling hasn't looked particularly good. But when I look at what both these guys bring to the table, what I'm seeing in Rob Font is a size advantage. He's going to be bigger, longer, taller than Figueiredo, and he's definitely got the cardio advantage as well. What you really notice about Deiveson Figueiredo in his past fights is that if you just make him grapple a little bit, he slows down very, very quickly. So while Figueiredo may be the better grappler than Font from a technical point of view, and while Figueiredo may have the edge on the ground in round one, this is one of those matchups where I think if Font came into this fight with a persistent grappling-based strategy, while it may be difficult for him to implement early on, because early in the fight Figueiredo is going to be difficult to take down and hold down while he's still full of energy and he's got that explosiveness to just explode back to his feet, or perhaps overwhelm Font on the ground. We know that all that explosiveness and strength comes at a cost, and like we've already said, Figueiredo's a guy that does fade very quickly if you force him to grapple. I think if Font came into this fight, took a bit of a page out of Glover Teixeira's book and thought, you know what, I'm getting rocked, I'm getting wobbled, I'm getting dropped a lot in fights these days. My reflexes aren't what they were, my chin wasn't what it was, and I'm now facing one of the biggest power punches I've faced in my career. Rather than, trying to stand and bang with this guy and risk getting knocked out, why don't I use my cardio and my size to take the fight to the ground where I'm not going to be in danger of being knocked out? I think if Font really, looked at Glover and the adjustment that he made to his fighting style, where he went from having a very heavy boxing-based style for the majority of his career to then a very grappling heavy style once he started to get rocked and wobbled a lot, I think Font can have a lot of success in this fight. And I know a lot of people will disagree with me on that, but it's just the way I see it. So it's a super, super complex fight. I definitely lean towards Figueiredo whenever I see the underdog with a clear and obvious path to victory, who absolutely has the particular thing they need to exploit their opponent's biggest weakness. Whenever I see that, I'm always going to lean towards the underdog. So Figueiredo's definitely my lean this weekend, and I'm very tempted to bet him. But for all the reasons I've mentioned in this breakdown, it's a really complex fight with so much to think about, and it's not like a clear cut. It's not a clear cut fight. It's very difficult to feel super confident on either guy. And I think if we want to continue, this kind of win rate and this kind of performance, we've got to be disciplined enough in situations like this where we're very tempted to bet a fighter like Figueiredo. We've just got to be disciplined enough to be like, you know what? If we bet Figueiredo this weekend, we're putting our money in a lot more danger than when we bet fighters like Adinez or Buckley or Sandeni or even Taylor Santos or Lucindu or Gaethje, Maverick. I didn't include these two because they were kind of hedges out of one bet. You guys get what I mean, right? We'd be kind of messing with a winning formula, which I don't really want to do. I don't really want to do that. So I am probably going to pass on Figueiredo this weekend, but I might change my mind once I see the weigh-ins. I will let you know. I'll obviously post in Discord if I do decide to bet Mr. Figueiredo. Alright, so if we take a look at the over-under on this one, it's actually an interesting one because the odds on the over 1.5 rounds are set quite steep, which indicates that the bookies do think this fight is quite likely to go deep, which is interesting to me because I think there's a pretty good chance Figueiredo could come out the gate super hard, catch Font with a bomb and knock him out. So, personally, we see the odds in the even money odds range for fight to go or not to go to a decision. I lean on the fight more not to go to a decision, because I think the most likely outcome in this fight is Figueiredo knocks Font out. It's probably not going to be something I would bet, but I think that's the most likely outcome. And then when you look at the props, I'm very surprised that the odds are this good. I thought Figueiredo to win by knockout or TKO would be shorter. So I don't like props. I'm not going to bet this myself. But if you do want to bet a prop on this fight to make watching it more interesting, I think Figueiredo to win by knockout or TKO, it is a no-brainer when you look at how easily Font has been getting wobbled in his recent fights and how hard Figgy hits. I think Figueiredo to win by knockout or TKO is quite likely to hit. I'm not sure if quite likely is the appropriate words to use there, but I hope you get what I mean based on everything that I've said in this breakdown video. So I hope you found that useful. If you did, please hit the like button below, subscribe if you haven't already. As you can tell, this is a very, very complex card full of complex, amazing fights. I'm absolutely loving it. Alright, now let's get into the next fight on this card, which is a super interesting matchup between Kelvin Gastelum and Sean Brady. I hope you could tell by the length of the breakdown videos on this card how amazing the event is this weekend. Such a good event, such good matchmaking with so many interesting complex fights from top to bottom. I'm really hoping that we can, make some money live betting these fights because it's just a fantastic card. So this is one of those matchups where rather than me try to explain how they match up stylistically, it's going to be a lot easier for me to show you how they match up stylistically with footage. So we'll get into that in a moment, but for now, let's take a look at the X factors on this fight. So Kelvin Gastelum, 32 years old, 5'9", with a 71.5 inch reach. Brady, 31 years old, 5'10", with a 72.5 inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size. And finally, Gastelum is back fighting in a weight class where he belongs. Now, the crazy thing about Gastelum is that even though he's dropping down from middleweight back down to welterweight for this fight, he's actually going to still be one of the smallest welterweights in the division, which is insane when you think about it, because when guys drop a weight class, you'd think they would have the size advantage. But at 5'9" with a 71.5 inch reach, that's the kind of wingspan that you'd expect to see in the lightweight division. If you went through the wingspan, the dimensions of height and reach for every single welterweight in the division, you'd see that Gastelum's definitely on the smaller end of the scale, which is kind of crazy because if you do see guys with a similar wingspan to Gastelum at welterweight. They're probably going to be, you know, those small, compact, muscular, powerhouse type fighters, you know, with big athleticism, big legit knockout power, which is not really, you know, what Gastelum brings to the table. So it's very strange. You know, Gastelum probably should have fought at lightweight throughout his career, but I love cheeseburgers just as much as anyone else, so I can't blame the guy for not wanting to kill himself to cut weight and be on a really strict diet, all that kind of stuff. But it is interesting to me how he's still going to be quite small in the welterweight division. You know, when you look at the size of guys like Kamaru Usman, Leon Edwards, you know, Chimaev, you know, some of the guys in, you know, in that top 5 title picture, absolutely huge. So anyway, both guys roughly the same size. Now, in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, it's a classic striker versus grappler matchup. And I think this is the main reason why when we look at the odds, we can see they're both in the even money odds range. You know, Brady, slight favourite, average odds of around 1.83, which is going to be minus 120 for an implied probability of 55%. And we can see that, let's pop this code over there, we can see that Gastelum, slight underdog, just say average odds of about 2.0, which is plus 100 for an implied probability of 50%. So both guys in the even money odds range, and I think the odds are in the even money odds range because most people can agree if the fight stays standing, Gastelum is probably going to do pretty well. If the fight goes to the ground, Brady probably going to do pretty well. And this fight is more than likely going to come down to how much success Brady can have with his grappling. So that's kind of why the odds are in the even money odds range. Both guys have got advantages in the area that they specialise in. And so the main focus of this breakdown is going to be working out how likely it is that Brady can use a grappling heavy game plan to cause Gastelum big problems. Now, Brady was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet on this card. Other names were, you know, Davis and Figueiredo, and Tsarukyan, who we've obviously bet. And the reason why Brady was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet is by using a similar logic that I would use towards heavily leaning towards Figueiredo and be very, very tempted to bet Figueiredo this weekend. In the sense that we know Brady is a good offensive wrestler with good grappling control. He's a strong grappler. So that's what Brady does really well. And we know that Gastelum's kryptonite throughout his career, his biggest weakness, has been his takedown offense and ground games. So this is another situation where we've got a fighter in Kelvin Gastelum whose biggest weakness is his takedown offense and ground game. And he's fighting a guy whose, you know, offensive wrestling and ground game are his biggest strengths. Right, and whenever we've got that combination, I think my mic might be a little bit too loud. Whenever we've got that combination, I'm always going to favour the guy whose biggest strength is well positioned to exploit his biggest weakness. Now, what is kind of interesting about this fight is that Gastelum doesn't necessarily have any massive advantages that could cause Brady a problem. So, whereas when we look at the Rob Font Figueiredo fight, you know, we can point to advantages in, you know, cardio and size and reach and potentially grappling for Rob Font over Figueiredo. When it comes to Gastelum, there are some advantages there, don't get me wrong, but I don't feel the advantages are as extreme as they are in the case of Font over Figueiredo. And so Brady is very interesting to me here, and again, Brady is a fighter that I'm very tempted to bet. And again, I haven't made my mind up on betting Brady yet. If I do bet him, I'll obviously drop it in the Discord, point out and post an announcement for everyone in our Discord group to to know we bet him. But at the moment, still making my mind up. I'll watch the ceremonial weigh-ins, see how I feel about it. So what I'm going to do is quickly summarize how these two match up when it comes to striking and grappling. I'm not going to go in a lot of detail with words, because then what I will do to kind of finish making my point, I'll show you guys some footage, because like I always say, footage is the only place you'll find truth and honesty in this game, because the footage, the camera doesn't lie. So if this fight stays standing, I do think Gastelum is going to do very well. What I like about Gastelum is that he's always on the attack. He's always throwing strikes. He's always forcing his opponents to engage. He's not the most technical, and you know, he doesn't land with the most impact. He's not the hardest hitter, but he's always touching you. He's always making you work. He's got a granite chin, a great gas tank. He likes to put you under a lot of pressure, and I don't think Brady is going to deal with that pressure particularly well. We saw Belal Muhammad put a lot of pressure on Brady, put him on the back foot, force him to fight on the outside, and Brady just didn't have the technique or the power in his hands to alleviate the pressure that Belal was putting on him. And I can see the stand-up kind of playing out in a similar way here, because neither of these guys are particularly powerful. They're both, for the most part, volume strikers, and because we know Gastelum has got a granite chin, I don't think he's going to have any problem or any concern taking control of the center of the octagon, standing right in front of Brady, pushing Brady on the on the back foot, and just peppering him with his boxing combinations. So I think Gastelum's going to do really well on the feet. What we saw from Brady, or what we have seen from Brady, is generally speaking a pretty good gas tank. You know, he can fight at a pretty high pace. Yes, he slowed a lot against Belal Muhammad, but relentless pressure and being forced to fight at an uncomfortable pace will do that to you. It will force you to burn way more energy than you're comfortable burning or capable of burning. And when you're fighting in a state of panic, because you're constantly having to try and circle away from your opponent and move away from your opponent to find time and space, you know, that adrenaline, that panic is also going to make it very difficult to control your heart rate, your breathing. And that's why you'd see Brady, you know, slow down a lot against someone like Belal because of the pressure he was under, and not necessarily slow down in other fights against different styles. But of course, Gastelum is a high pressure striker, so he's capable of putting Brady in those same positions Belal did. So while I wouldn't classify Brady as someone that has a bad gas tank, the dynamic of how these two match up means that Brady's likely to slow the longer the fight wears on, if Gastelum can make him work hard. Whereas we don't have that concern with Gastelum, because we've seen this guy sprint non-stop relentlessly for 15 minutes and never slow, no matter what type of stylistic matchup he's involved in. He's got that Mexican blood, that Latin American blood, and that famous Mexican gas tank. So that's how they match up on the feet. Now, in terms of grappling, Brady, and it will be people who will disagree with me this week, but Brady has an absolute enormous advantage over Kelvin Gastelum on the ground. And to highlight how big of an advantage he has, rather than listen to me ramble on about it and bore you all to death with words, we're much better off just taking a look at the footage, because the footage doesn't lie. So the first fight that we're going to take a little look at is Gastelum's fight against Robert Whittaker. Now, the matchup was 2 years ago, over 2 years ago, and so it's possible that Gastelum could have improved his takedown offense and ground game a lot since this fight. However, Gastelum's takedown offense and ground game has been bad through the entire history of his career. It's just very weird. It's something he's never improved. Sometimes you get fighters like Kelvin Gastelum or Mackenzie Dern with these giant holes in grappling in their game. In Mackenzie Dern, I'm talking about the lack of offensive wrestling, and for whatever reason, they just never seem to improve, and it's always their Achilles heel. It always holds them back. It's very much what we've seen from Kelvin Gastelum over the years. His takedown offense ground game's never really improved that much, and it has held him back. So just want to kind of show you a few clips to highlight that. Now, similar to Figueiredo, where we were saying when he moves up a weight class to bantamweight, his power might not translate up, right? He might not be as dangerous, as powerful in a heavier weight class. It's possible that Gastelum, now he's dropping down from middleweight to welterweight, could be much harder to kind of take down and hold down and control, because obviously at middleweight he's facing much bigger human beings than he will be at welterweight, and so he may be a lot more scrambly, a lot more difficult to control on the ground than he was at middleweight, right? That's possible. However, from a technical point of view, Gastelum does so much wrong on the ground and so much wrong with takedown defense that I just think his takedown defense and ground game is just very bad, and I don't think size will have too much of an impact on that, other than perhaps he might be a Derek Lewis or Mark Hunt type fighter that even though their takedown defense is bad, they may just be able to get back up if you take him down, and that could also exhaust Brady if he's burning through a lot of energy to get takedowns and not be able to rack up much top control. That's something we're not going to have the answer to just yet, because we don't know how Gastelum is going to deal with being taken down. It's been a long time since we saw him at welterweight. So this is fight against Whittaker. Rob Whittaker, obviously primarily a striker, and that's something else that is an important detail to pay attention to before I show you this footage, because some of the clips that I'm going to show you now are of Gastelum facing guys that, in my opinion, and again there will be people that will disagree, but in my opinion I'm going to be showing you some clips of guys that are not as good on the ground as Sean Brady. I think Sean Brady's grappling is very good. So when I show you clips of Gastelum against Robert Whittaker, Ian Heinisch, how far do you want to go back? Maybe Jacare, maybe a bit of Hermanson, maybe a bit of Bisping, maybe a bit of Weidman. How far do you really want to go back, right? Probably not that far. 6 years, long time. But, point being, I do rate Brady's MMA grappling quite high. So while Whittaker may be a better overall fighter and may have achieved a lot more in his career, and while Hermanson, it's debatable, how you rate Hermanson's grappling versus Brady. For me, Brady is the best MMA grappler that Gastelum's faced in a long time, probably dating back to 2017. Jacare's name is in there, but for me, Jacare was never the best MMA grappler. He just had that very high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu pedigree. But in terms of the all-round MMA game, grappling, control, offensive wrestling, that grindy style of grappling, Jacare never really had that. You'd be another one of these Brazilians who would burn himself out if he tried to persistently grapple. So Brady's got that. So anyway, show a little bit of footage here, and just pay attention to how bad Gastelum's takedown offense is, really. So we don't have to wait long before we get to see it. Skip through. Again, don't want to make this breakdown any longer than it needs to be. So here we go, about 2 minutes in. Whittaker just grabs a hold of Gastelum, and just look at how easily Gastelum goes down into side control. Now, here, what I want you to pay... Sorry, my dog's going absolutely crazy. There's someone at the door. My wife's just getting the door, and then we'll continue going through this. Really sorry about this. How amateur of me. It's not worth restarting now. Alright, so what I want you to do here is pay attention to how weak Gastelum looks off his back. And again, we know Whittaker is big and strong, but Brady is a very good MMA grappler as well, with very, very strong grappling control. So what you see here, Whittaker takes his half guard position, and then he just stays very heavy and tight from top position. Now, when you first see someone hit the ground, what you want to see from the guy on the bottom is him exploding like crazy to try and pop back up to his feet before his opponent has taken him down, has an opportunity to establish a dominant position. I always use the example of the Team Alpha Male guys. You think of your legacy Team Alpha Male alumni, right? Your Chad Mendez's, your TJ Dillashaw's, your Uriah Faber's. The list goes on and on and on. Who have we got else? Your Cody Garbrandt, even. And now you look at the next generation of Team Alpha Male fighters like Song Yadong's. What you notice about these Team Alpha Male guys is that they're virtually impossible to hold down and establish a dominant position on. As soon as they hit the ground, they immediately work hard to scramble back up to their feet. Whenever I see a guy like Gastelum, that as soon as they hit the ground, they kind of just hesitate for a moment and don't do very much as soon as they've hit the ground, it's always a giant red flag from a technical point of view, because they, in that moment of time where they hesitate, they're giving their opponent who's taken them down an opportunity to establish an even more dominant position or put them in an even worse position. And that's what we see happen here. You know, from side control, Gastelum's legs are free, so he could have potentially tried to turn into Whittaker and get to his knees and pop back up. But instead he hesitates, and that enables Whittaker to take this half guard position. So he hesitates. I mean, he's fucking around with a Kimura or something. I don't even know what he's doing. But that just enables Whittaker to step over into half guard, which is a far worse position for Gastelum to be in. It's a lot harder to work your way back up to your feet from half guard than it is from side control, because in half guard, you know, one of your legs, one side of your body is basically pinned down. It's just way harder. Now, again, Whittaker starts to throw Gastelum a bit of a lifeline here by posturing up and throwing this ground and pound. This is giving Gastelum space to scramble back up to his feet. But again, he looks pretty weak off his back, doesn't take it. And then Whittaker jumps back into half guard. Now, this is always a red flag for me. Whenever you see a fighter do this, it's like the biggest red flag in the world. Watch what Gastelum does here. We'll slow it down just so you can get a good look at it. But basically, whenever you see a fighter in a bad position and they look over to their corner in frustration, that's a huge red flag for me, because it shows either they don't know what to do in this position or they're kind of distracted and frustrated. Like, watch what Gastelum does here. Like, he'll look over at his corner as if to say, like, fuck, you know, what am I supposed to do? You know, this is a guy that has been in the UFC. You know, look at how frustrated he is. He's like, oh, fuck. You know, this is a guy that has been in the UFC for, at this point, you know, 7 or 8 years. And you still are looking over to your corner here. You can see his corner there. He was looking in their direction. Still looking over to your corner for help and advice on how to work back up to your feet. And you can just see he's making no attempt to recover guard. You know, no attempt to create space for himself off his back. He's kind of just hanging on to Whittaker and doing a whole lot of nothing. So, you know, he spends the rest of the round on the bottom pretty much. You know, Whittaker kind of lets him back up right towards the end of the round. You know, gives him the space to scramble back up as he threw that right hand. But for the most part, looked very, very weak off his back. Now, if we go into the second round, we'll just whiz through this. Whiz through, whiz through, whiz through, whiz through. And when you have so much success controlling your opponent from top position, why would you not put the fight right back there? Whittaker gets the body lock, and again, look at how easily he hits that body lock takedown straight into side control. Now, here, Gastelum does what you want to see. He immediately tries to scramble back up to his feet before Whittaker has an opportunity to take that half guard position. And look at what that means, right? He's able to quickly get to his knees and scramble back up. And Whittaker doesn't obtain, you know, much grappling control there. And that's the difference, right? When he got taken down in round 1, lie on his back, allowing Whittaker to establish a dominant position and hold him down. Whereas there, quickly scramble back up to his feet before Whittaker could take half guard. That's what you want to see, but all too often Gastelum hesitates after he's been taken down. It's almost like he needs that thinking time. He just doesn't think quick enough in grappling positions, and that can get you into a lot of trouble when you're facing a very high-level grappler or high-level MMA grappler like Sean Brady. So anyway, that's round 2. Anything for us to see in round 3? Let's skip through. I can't remember actually if Whittaker hits a takedown in round 3. I obviously watched this fight a few days ago, but there's only so much hard drive space in terms of remembering exactly what happened in each individual round. So Whittaker just kind of cruises here in the third, right? No more grappling. No, that's it. Okay, so now, obviously, there are people out there that rate Whittaker's grappling very highly. He obviously owns a wrestling
Just about
in Australia. I think it's fair to say that we do not rate Ian Heinish's grappling as highly. So this is a good fight to watch. So in this fight, Gastelum probably recognised that he's facing a wrestler in Heinisch. So he needs to be a little bit more proactive with the wrestling. Against Whittaker, it was almost like Gastelum, thought Whittaker would just want to stand and strike with him, right? Whittaker's a striker, so Gastelum was like, let's stand and bang. And then, maybe that's why he was getting taken down so easily, because Whittaker had the element of surprise on his side. With Ian Heinisch, Heinisch is primarily a grappler, so you know exactly what to expect from him. He's going to try and take you down. So Gastelum's defensive wrestling was a bit better in this one. He was a bit more proactive with the MMA grappling, but in terms of his actual technique, still very, very bad. So early in the fight, Heinisch wastes no time, shoots a nice single leg, transitions to a double leg, drives through, and takes Gastelum down. So again, just like the second takedown in the Whittaker fight in that round 2, here, instead of Gastelum giving Heinisch an opportunity to establish a dominant position, immediately works to clear his legs and scramble back up to his feet. So that's good stuff. He then hits a crazy roll and wins a 50-50 scramble to pop back up to his feet. All very nice. And then here, for some strange reason, Heinisch thought it would be a good idea to pull guard off a Kimura attempt. I never understand why fighters do that, but it doesn't work out too good for him, because he just then gets out-hustled in the clinch position for a while by Gastelum. Gastelum then hits a very nice outside trip. Boom. Very nice. And again, Heinisch, still in love with a Kimura, tries to hit a reversal, but not an easy thing to do when your opponent is anchoring themselves with their left leg. And so, only a matter of time before Heinisch has got to let this go. There we go. He has to let it go. Has nothing there. And finds himself mounted. But anyway, what we're more focusing on in this fight is obviously Gastelum's defensive wrestling, takedown offense, things like that. And you can see he did give up an easy takedown at the beginning of that first round against Heinisch. So here, Heinisch, a little bit tired in this second round, shoots a takedown there. Gastelum showed him strong hips. Good takedown offense. We like it a lot. And then gets his own takedown. You can see how Gastelum's more proactive, right? It's almost like he's got these two different modes where against Whittaker, his grappling looked really bad because he wasn't expecting to grapple. But in this fight, he's holding his own against Heinisch because Heinisch is a grappler, right? He's expecting to grapple, so he's in grappling mode. And for that reason, perhaps he does, reasonably well against Sean Brady this weekend. But we keep going. The round 3 is the main bit that I want to show you in this one. So Heinisch a bit tired there in that second round. We knew Heinisch is a guy that has a tendency to slow. But this third round, Gastelum makes some mistakes which could really cost him against a guy like Brady. And in my opinion, Brady's MMA grappling is 10 times better than Ian Heinisch's. So here, Heinisch opens up round 3 with a big takedown attempt. Into a single leg, transitions to a double. And again, this is where Gastelum's grappling is quite difficult to read in terms of what to expect from him. So his takedown offense is pretty poor here. Yes, it's a very nice entry from Heinisch, but he gets taken down, similar sort of takedown to what Heinisch took him down with in round 1. But I always say, if you guys watch my breakdown videos every week, I always say it's not a deal breaker for me when someone has bad takedown defense. It's only a deal breaker for me when they can't work their way back up to their feet quickly. Because obviously if you get taken down, but you can get back up to your feet quickly, your opponent doesn't really score. So it is not the end of the world if you've got bad takedown defense. Just don't lie on your back doing nothing. And where we spoke earlier in this breakdown about it being really important to show urgency to scramble back up to your feet the second you get taken down. And we saw Gastelum not really do a very good job of that in the Whittaker fight. In this fight, he is doing a good job of it. Because as soon as Heinisch completes the takedown there, you can see Gastelum work really hard to clear his legs from underneath Heinisch and scramble over to the octagon, where he can use the octagon as a base to defend further takedowns that Heinisch might look to chain into. And that's good stuff, because if Gastelum is going to fight like this against Brady, where he's very scrambly, and he's going to make it difficult for Brady to establish dominant positions when Brady first hits that takedown, the fight becomes exponentially more difficult for Brady, especially because we know Brady may wear down in this fight. Whereas you can see here, this is the third round and Gastelum hasn't slowed down at all. He's still light on his feet, looking reasonably fresh with still good output. So Gastelum with his own takedown there. But I want to show you this sequence here only because we've seen a mixture of stuff from Gastelum in grappling positions in this footage that I've shown you. We've shown a mixture of really good stuff where he showed a lot of urgency to scramble back up to his feet when he's been taken down. We've even seen situations where he's read the takedown attempt from his opponent very early, shown him strong hips and neutralised the threat of the takedown before he even gets close to completing. And that's all good stuff. But we've also seen a lot of bad stuff from Gastelum where he hesitates on the ground, looks a little bit clueless, gives up cheap takedowns. And remember what I said at the very beginning of this breakdown. For me, Sean Brady is the best MMA grappler that Gastelum has fought probably since Chris Weidman back in 2017. And so what concerns me about Gastelum is he's very raw on the ground. He makes a lot of mistakes in grappling positions. Like, I haven't really pointed out the fact that when he does scramble back up to his feet against Heinisch in this matchup, or where he did scramble back up to his feet in the second round against Whittaker, he kind of just gives his back up, right? He doesn't keep his elbows tight to his knees to make it difficult for his opponents to get in deep hooks if they jump on his back and look for that back control position. He kind of just gives his back up. And so Gastelum is very raw. He's very green on the ground. He makes a lot of mistakes. But for me, when you look at the grapplers that he's been facing, you know, Whittaker primarily a striker, Heinisch not a particularly skilled grappler. You know, you look at the Hermanson fight, ended very quickly. Jacare doesn't really have the cardio to grapple hard for 3 rounds. When you look at the guys that Gastelum's faced since that Chris Weidman fight, none of them have really had that really tight technical MMA grappling that Brady has, and that capability that Brady has to just obtain a dominant position, either off a takedown or back control, and then just fucking shut his shit down and keep you in that bad position for the rest of the round. Gastelum hasn't really been facing guys like that. But what this next sequence of grappling shows us, it kind of highlights that there's a lot of issues with Gastelum's grappling, a lot of them. And they're somewhat masked by the fact he hasn't faced particularly good grapplers in recent years, and also masked by the fact that he's just got great cardio and he's scrappy and game and tough as hell. So watch this. So Gastelum drives through on a very nice high crotch takedown here into side control. All very good. 2.5 minutes left to go in the round. Ian Heinisch is very tired. You're in top position. There should be no danger here. Gastelum's looking very, very good. But then, out of nowhere, as Heinisch starts to scramble back up to his feet, he hits like a crazy reversal, which I can't remember the last time I saw a reversal like this in a UFC fight. But I don't even know what to call that. Please let me know on Discord or in the comments below what the fuck's that called. I don't know enough about BJJ to know what the fuck this is the Heinisch just did, but hey, if it works, it works. You very rarely see that in the UFC. But he hits this crazy reversal and gets the back control. Now there's two... I wish I had like one of those broadcast type tools where I could just repeat this sequence while I talk so you can kind of take it in. But there's two interesting things to focus on with this position. The first is, to be honest, Heinisch is a giant middleweight. So when he gets to this 50-50 position here, where you see the position of Gastelum's arm, Gastelum has all the leverage here, right, in this position. So if both guys are pretty much the same size, pretty much the same weight, good chance Gastelum wins this 50-50 position, uses his left arm to roll Heinisch back onto his back and retake side control. So I do think the fact that Heinisch is a lot bigger and heavier than Gastelum is one of the reasons why he was able to hit that crazy reversal. And the reason why we don't see reversals like that in the UFC very often is because you very rarely see guys as undersized as Gastelum facing much bigger opponents, you know, in their weight class, right? We've got weight classes for a reason. So I do think size had an impact on this reversal that Heinisch was able to hit. But it also kind of illustrates to me how low level Gastelum is on the ground to get caught with a reversal like that. And this is where, you know, weaknesses in Gastelum's skill set start to show themselves. And as Heinisch takes side control here, Gastelum starts to make the mistake that we spoke about him making in the Whittaker fight and earlier in the Heinisch fight, where he kind of just exposes his back. But Whittaker didn't try to take it, and Heinisch didn't think quick enough to make him pay for that earlier in this fight. But at this point in the fight, Heinisch is way closer to Gastelum. His arms are already close to the head area of Gastelum. So when Gastelum starts to give his back up to try and scramble back up to his feet, it's far easier for Heinisch to get back control now. And that's exactly what he does. As Gastelum just gives his back up here to try and scramble, you see Heinisch gets the hook in. Now what's very, very, very interesting, again, I'm really sorry this breakdown's very long, but the devil is in the detail. If you want to make money betting on sports, you have to pay close attention to the details, because that's where the gold is. Here, this is what really illustrates the fact that Gastelum is very low level on the ground. Because from here, Heinisch doesn't really have a lot. You see the position of his heel and where his body is. He doesn't really have the angle or the leverage to sink in this hook on the left side, because gravity is kind of pulling him away from Gastelum here. And look at the position of Heinisch's right leg. Doesn't have a hook in here either. So Gastelum is not in a very bad position here at all. In actual fact, it's Heinisch that's in the bad position. Because if Gastelum keeps his right arm tight to his right thigh and his left arm tight to his left thigh, Heinisch isn't going to have the space to sink the hooks in to get back control. But again, like we see Gastelum do so much in his fights, he hesitates and he just doesn't think quick enough. He gets preoccupied with defending his neck, which I do understand. You don't want to get rear naked choked. But you can keep your chin tucked and you can keep your elbows close to your thighs, especially when you've got a short torso like Gastelum, in a position where it's going to be very difficult for Heinisch to get hooks in. And I'll play this in real time in a moment so you can kind of see how much Gastelum hesitates. But he just hesitates, which then enables Heinisch to get that hook in on the left side. And again, look at the position of Gastelum's right arm. That should be tight to his right leg so that Heinisch can't get this left hook in play. But instead, the right arm is in no man's land. It's doing nothing. Look, what is his right arm doing? His right arm is doing absolutely nothing. And then Heinisch gets the second hook in play. And it's just like, he's very bad on the ground. Like, Gastelum is very, very bad on the ground. I don't want to be disrespectful to Gastelum. He's 10 times the man I will ever be. I would literally curl up in a ball, cry in a corner if I was forced to go into a cage fight to the death. But it is shocking to me that a guy like Kelvin Gastelum, who's been in the title picture in 2 divisions, he's been in the UFC for almost 10 years, he's had so many fights, he's trained at some of the best gyms in the world, he's got Rafael Cordero in his corner, who's one of the best MMA coaches in the history of the game. It just blows my mind how we see him looking completely clueless underneath Robert Whittaker, looking over to his corner for help on what to do. And in positions like this, just totally gifting his back to Heinisch and just looking like a blue belt on the ground. It blows my mind. It's almost like he just can only really focus on one thing at a time, and he just doesn't put it all together at all. So anyway, let me just play it in real time, because in real time you kind of see that in real time you kind of see the hesitation that we've spoken about with Gastelum. And again, look, he doesn't get a lot of thinking time here. It's not like, you know, Heinisch is chilling on his back for 10-20 seconds, right? Not like tons of thinking time for Gastelum. But you have to think fast in positions like this, because that wasn't a particularly slick or a particularly quick back take from Heinisch. He started to face these higher level, you know, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners, these higher level MMA grapplers. They're going to obtain dominant positions on a guy like Gastelum like that. And he needs to think quicker. This is the position in real time. Just look at how slow Gastelum is here. As soon as Heinisch gets to his back here, he should be thinking about keeping those elbows tight, making life difficult for Heinisch to get those hooks in play, and turning into Heinisch to try and pivot from top position when it's clear that Heinisch doesn't really have the angle or leverage to get that left hook in play. Just fucks it, man. He just fucks it. Look, hesitates, and then 2 hooks are in. And to the naked eye, that doesn't seem like a lot of time, right? That's like 2-3 seconds. But in those 2-3 seconds, you've got to be thinking, this guy wants to get hooks in. And I need to stop him from doing that. And Gastelum doesn't. He just doesn't. Hesitates. Now he's in back control. And it could be avoided. And so we see him make mistakes like this against low-level grapplers like Heinisch. A guy like Sean Brady, you know, even here, right? A guy like Sean Brady will just get to the body triangle from this position, shut your shit down. You spend the rest of the time getting backpacked, or the rest of the time in this round getting backpacked, and the round is gone. Just through making those silly little mistakes. And even like this position is concerning, because again, even though Heinisch has got back control here, he doesn't really have a lot. Doesn't really have very much here. He doesn't really have a tight grip around Gastelum's neck. Look at how loose these hooks are, right? It's not like he's got 2 deep hooks in play where they're threaded deep in between the groin and the thighs of Gastelum to generate a lot of leverage, to make it difficult for Gastelum to move around in there. Like Heinisch has gone to the body triangle. Here, in this position, Gastelum should be trying to pivot and explode into top position. Should be trying to, with everything he's got, should be trying to turn into Heinisch. And again, he just hesitates. Hesitates. And the problem is, again, it's not a lot of time. But a really skilled MMA grappler in this position would just go to the body triangle here, and then that takes away Gastelum's ability to pivot into top position and wind up on top. Heinisch isn't that skilled, so he doesn't do that. And so, eventually, Gastelum remembers what he needs to do after an eternity. I mean, look at how much space there is in here, man. He just hesitates so much in bad positions. Eventually, you can see, look at the position of his head here. Eventually, Gastelum starts to turn into Heinisch. Starting to think about it. See how he's kind of turning? And Heinisch reads that and looks to take mount at the same time. But inevitably, Gastelum, when he actually realizes, okay, in this position, I need to be trying to pivot to my right to scramble into top position. Inevitably, when he realizes he needs to do that, look at the position he finds himself in. Gets into top position pretty easily, right? Wins that scramble. But Gastelum should have done that the second he got to his knees after being caught in that reversal and Heinisch was trying to take his back. That's when he should be trying to explode into top position. He's got the cardio to do it. He's got the energy to do it. Heinisch is big, slow and tired. There's no reason why you're not doing it there if you've just done it there. He makes a lot of mistakes that a guy like Brady can really make him pay for. So this breakdown video is really long now, but it's a complex fight, and just understanding these positions helps you understand the complexity of the matchup, because what you've got between these two is a situation where Brady, I could see a situation in this matchup where Brady easily gets Gastelum down, easily obtains dominant positions, and just ties Gastelum up from back control or half guard, runs the clock down, and is so dominant on the ground that Gastelum just doesn't have a chance because of the skill gap between these two when it comes to grappling. And I think that's the most likely outcome, if I'm being honest, and that's why my lean is on Brady on this fight, and that's why I'm very tempted to bet Brady. I think Brady's MMA grappling is good enough to cause Kelvin Gastelum massive problems this weekend. The problem is, if Gastelum's got more energy at welterweight and he's bigger and he's stronger and he's more scrambly than he looked at middleweight, he could, just be a big ball of energy, irrespective of his deficiencies in technical ability. Could just be a big ball of energy that is very difficult to hold down and tie up. We saw in flashes, in certain moments against Ian Heinisch and Robert Whittaker, he's very scrambly, he is very explosive when he wants to be. His issue is in those moments of uncertainty where he hesitates that give those dominant positions to his opponents. And against Whittaker and Heinisch, Gastelum to some degree got away with making mistakes. Yes, he lost the Whittaker fight, but wasn't like he was out-grappled a ton in rounds 2 and 3. If you make those same mistakes against Brady, you're just going to get tied up, controlled, and lose the fight 30-27, and it'll be a comfortable night for Brady. So, like I say, on one hand, I could see Brady putting on a grappling clinic, but on the other hand, I could see Gastelum being very scrambly, very explosive, not settling for bad positions on the ground, which will then force Brady to have to chain wrestle and be very persistent with his grappling, which will take a lot more energy, which will potentially result in Brady slowing down a lot and burning himself out in the same way we kind of saw in the Belal Muhammad fight, where Brady was trying to come forward and use offensive wrestling to hit takedowns to alleviate the pressure that Belal Muhammad was putting on him. But because Belal Muhammad's defensive wrestling is so brilliant, Brady just wasn't able to get anywhere near taking Belal down. And that's why he burnt himself out. The devil's in the detail. Brady doesn't have bad cardio, but if you make him fight in a certain way, he's obviously going to slow, because you're taking him out of his comfort zone where he can't control his heart rate, his breathing, his output. It's a very complex matchup, which is why we've been talking about it for 45 minutes. I think it's time we move on, but I hope you found everything I just said very useful. If you did, please let me know. We've got to talk about the over-under. We've got to talk about the prop bets. Let's take a look at where they're at. So the over-under on this fight, set in the even money odds range for fight to go or not to go to a decision. My lean is that the fight will go deep, but I'm not going to be betting the over-under on this one, because even though both these guys are tough and they're well-rounded and they're difficult to finish, which makes my lean more towards the fight going deep, there are circumstances surrounding this matchup where I could definitely see a finish. The first being, Gastelum is so green on the ground and he makes so many mistakes that a guy that thinks as fast as Brady on the ground with his submission game might catch Gastelum in a bad position and submit him before Gastelum has a chance to react, which is kind of similar to what Jack Hermanson did, where he caught him in that heel hook in 1 minute and 20 seconds, caught him cold. Gastelum just didn't see it coming. Brady is certainly capable of doing that. Also, what we could see is a similar sort of situation to the Belal Muhammad fight, where Brady can't establish a dominant position, can't run the clock down with grappling, gets out hustled, fades, gasses, gets finished late on. I could see that as well. So I'm not going to be touching the over-under on this one. But if you want to bet it because you like to gamble, I think it's more likely the fight goes deep. Take from now what you will. In terms of prop bets on this one, I don't like props. I don't bet props myself. But for the gamblers out there that like to place a lot of bets for entertainment, some props you might want to think about. Gastelum to win in round 3, which is going to be... Actually, the odds aren't that great. I thought the odds would be better than that. But that's a prop you might want to think about. Gastelum to win in round 3, 13.0 plus 1,200. Another one you might want to think about. Brady by submission's not the best odds, to be honest. And both guys pretty much the same odds to win by decision. My lean's Brady by decision, grappling clinic, but yes, don't love the odds on that. Not in love with the odds. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Alright, now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Clay Guida versus Tsarukyan Silva. Now, whenever I research a Clay Guida fight, I always think, you know what, this could be quite a good stylistic matchup for Clay. And when I saw that he was facing someone like Tsarukyan Silva, whose takedown defense and ground game has been a big weakness for him throughout his career, despite the fact that he actually has a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And whenever I see a guy like Silva, who's predominantly a kickboxer, facing a guy like Clay Guida that built a career off being a relentless, persistent MMA grappler, I always think, you know what, that's a pretty good stylistic matchup for Clay, and at underdog odds, he could be a very good bet. But then when I go and watch footage of Clay Guida, I'm reminded of the fact that Father Time is undefeated, and a 41-year-old Clay Guida, who's gonna be 42 years old tomorrow. The Clay Guida in his 40s is not the same Clay Guida in his 30s, and he's just not capable of doing the same things that he could 10 years ago. And so where I started watching the UFC 20 years ago, and you know, Clay Guida, one of my favourite fighters ever, obviously his fight against Diego Sanchez, one of the greatest fights of all time. You know, I've got very fond memories of Guida, and in my mind I've got this perception of the kind of fighter that Clay Guida is. But like I always say, the only place you'll find truth and honesty in this game is in the fight footage, because it doesn't lie. And when we look at the most recent performances of Guida from over the last couple of years, he just isn't capable of doing the things anymore that he built a career off doing so well. And that's to be expected. You know, the guy has had over 60 pro fights, which is insane. And Guida's never been one of these guys to get the job done quickly. And he's had a granite chin throughout the majority of his career and has been tough as nails. So, for the most part, Guida was a decisionator throughout his career. And we've seen him involved in so many wars, right? We just mentioned that his fight against Diego Sanchez, one of the greatest fights of all time, that was a 3-round war. You just see, right, decision. These are some grappling matchups. You know, 3 decisions there. Decision, round 3, you go back. Lots of decisions, right? Lots of wars. And not only that, but Guida is a guy that, from almost day one in his UFC career, has consistently been in that top 10 picture. Guida's never fought for a title, never come close to being a champion, but he's always been a top 10, top 15 guy. So he's consistently fought the best lightweights in the world for pretty much his entire career. You know, you can see back in Strikeforce, he was facing guys like Josh Thompson, Gilbert Melendez, and then when he came to the UFC, second fight, Dean Thomas, Tyson Griffin, Roger Huerta, Mac Danzig, Nate Diaz, Diego Sanchez, Kenny Florian, Rafael Dos Anjos, Takanori Gomi, Anthony Pettis, Benson Henderson, Gray Maynard. The list goes on and on and on. Clay Guida's for everyone who has ever been anything in the lightweight division, and for that reason there's a lot of wear and tear on his body, a lot of miles on the clock, and no surprise to see Father Time hitting him pretty hard at this stage in his career, and it's kind of a miracle that he's still going in his early 40s. Whenever I see a guy like Guida, I always think, is this the fight where they're going to retire? Guida doesn't strike me as the guy that is going to take retirement particularly well. He's always loved fighting, but can't be long now, right? And maybe the same can be said for Miesha Tate this week as well. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, it is a classic striker versus grappler matchup. Even though Joaquim Silva claims to have a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he's got a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tattoo. His nickname is Neto BJJ. We know when you look at his past fights, for the most part, he's a kickboxer. And it's actually MMA grapplers he's run into trouble with. I think for the most part, it's because with his base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he's quite happy to be taken down and fight off his back with his BJJ. We see, you know, a lot of fighters with a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu make this mistake. You know, his countrywoman Poliana Viana springs to mind as a big weakness in her game. And for me, Mr. Neto BJJ here, Joaquim Silva, doesn't show enough urgency to work his way back up to his feet or defend takedowns, which does add an interesting dimension to this matchup, because we know that Clay Guida built a career off being a strong MMA grappler and a very persistent MMA grappler who could kind of spam takedowns relentlessly for 3 rounds. And this is really where Father Time kind of changes how these two match up stylistically, because Guida was one of these guys who was never a particularly good striker, right? He was wild and scrappy and sloppy on the feet. And he was never a particularly good grappler either, right? He was one of these guys who was pretty good at getting you down, but because of his body type, you didn't have the best grappling control. You would kind of knock guys down and struggle to hold them down. But Guida's biggest strength throughout his career was his pace and his persistence and his cardio. You know, Guida was a guy that could grapple hard relentlessly for 15 minutes, and eventually he would just drown guys in that pressure and the output that he would throw out there. That's why Guida is struggling at the age of 41, because he still wants to fight like that. But the 41-year-old Clay Guida can't fight like the 31-year-old Guida. And so Guida now slows his fights wear on. So he can't put that kind of relentless grappling pace on his opponents that he built a career off. And that's why when we look at the odds this weekend, we can see he's a big underdog. You know, Joaquim Silva, around about a 1.30 favourite, which is minus 333 for an implied probability of around 77%. And Clay Guida is the underdog at average odds of around 3.55, which is plus 255. If these guys were fighting 10 years ago, this would be a nightmare stylistic matchup for Silva. But Father Time's a motherfucker. Guida ain't the same dude anymore. So in terms of how these two match up in 2023, if the fight stays standing, Silva's got a big advantage. Guida's never really had much power in his hands. He's got the old knockout here and there, which you'd expect for a guy with 60 pro fights. We said something similar about Bobby Green in the breakdown video for the Jalen Turner fight. So Guida definitely has a few knockouts on his record, but for the most part, he's not a dangerous striker. He's also quite sloppy. He's also quite bad defensively. At the age of 41, his reflexes aren't going to be what they were. And again, even though Guida built a career off being very tough, very durable, having a very good chin, there aren't many 40-year-olds in the UFC that can take a shot these days, right? Joaquim Silva is 34 years old, which makes him, 8 years younger than 7 or 8 years younger than Clay Guida, which statistically gives him around a 67% chance of winning. But this is one of those kind of age gaps where that stat is really meaningful, because Joaquim Silva is, just kind of in his prime for a lightweight, 33, 34 years old. getting a little bit old, but he's only had 16 pro fights, so, you know, hasn't shown any signs of decline. He's still fast, he's still explosive, still very athletic. And so both these guys are at that stage in their career where at 41 years old, Guida is going to be declining a lot from fight to fight, and he's at that stage in his career where, you know, his body is really going to be starting to fail him. All those chronic injuries, all those brutal weight cuts over the years catching up with him. Whereas Silva, younger, fresher, in his prime, more athletic, and just purely based on that alone, this becomes a tough fight for Clay Guida. Now, if we look at the tail of the tape, Silva's 5'8" with a 69-inch reach, Guida 5'7" with a 70-inch reach, so both of them roughly about the same size, but I do think there's going to be a big difference in like explosiveness and athleticism in this one. I think that's an area Silva's going to have a pretty big edge. So if the fight stays standing, Silva should be able to light Guida up. He lands the harder, more powerful, more impactful strikes. He fights at a decent pace. He's pretty aggressive. I don't think this fight is going to be fun for Guida on the feet, and I could even see Silva getting a knockout. In terms of grappling, Silva's got pretty good cardio, and he's good at defending himself on the ground because he's got that base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And unlike Mr. Kelvin Gastelum, he's also quite scrambly. He's got an active guard, so when he wants to get back up to his feet, he's pretty good at doing it. And this is where the fight becomes difficult for Clay, because we know Clay doesn't have the energy to relentlessly grapple hard for 3 rounds like he built his career off. And because Silva's quite scrambly and difficult to hold down, even if Guida does hit takedowns in this fight, which I think he can because Silva's takedown offense isn't the best, Guida's probably not going to be able to achieve a whole lot with his grappling control, because if Silva wants to get back up to his feet, he more likely is going to be able to. So it's a difficult fight for Clay. In terms of where the odds are, if you really want to bet this fight, I do think it is dog or pass. I think you'd be crazy to bet Silva at these odds. Very, very steep odds. Very little upside in betting a guy like Silva in that odds range. So I do think it's dog or pass, but not a great idea to bet on 40-year-old fighters in cage fights to the death when they're facing young, hungry bulls. And if you do bet Clay Guida this weekend, more than likely you're going to lose your money. So it wouldn't be for me personally, even though the value probably does lie on the side of Guida this weekend with how steep Silva's odds are. Now, in terms of the over-under on this one, over 1.5 rounds is very interesting to me. I haven't made my mind up if I'm going to bet that yet. I will drop it in the Discord if I do decide to bet it. And I see how these two guys look at the ceremonial weigh-ins, because sometimes when you see a guy like Guida who's in his early 40s, they can just all of a sudden look very old on the scales. So if Guida shows up looking really old, obviously we know he's got the receding hairline, he's starting to go bald. If Guida doesn't look good at the weigh-ins, I will be less interested in the over on this fight. But because of how tough both these guys are, the over 1.5 rounds is interesting to me. We've already said for the most part Guida was a bit of a decisionator throughout his career. You know, he's gone the distance in his last 2 fights against Scott Holtzman and Rafa Garcia. And to be fair, Holtzman's got decent power in his hands. I know Holtzman's pretty old, but Holtzman does hit hard. And, you know, going the distance with a tough guy like Rafa Garcia, pretty impressive as well. So, yeah, you know, Guida's not an easy guy to get out of there. My lean would be more towards this fight going deep. If we look at Silva's record, obviously he's an explosive, dynamic striker. So he got some knockouts on his record that will pose a threat to Guida for sure. But Guida built a career off being tough and durable, and he's not easy to get out of there. So the over 1.5 rounds is interesting to me, and I'll obviously post in Discord and let you guys know via an announcement if I decide to bet it. I just haven't made my mind up yet. These fights are so complex this weekend. So much to think about that I'm just going to need to sit back on Saturday and decide exactly what I want to do when the dust settles and all the work and the research is done for this card. So in terms of the prop bets for this one, in terms of the props, I don't really like the props on this one. Silva by decision was interesting to me, but the odds are pretty steep. I would definitely not go Silva by knockout or TKO. Those odds are really, really tight. I don't like those at all. Is it the most likely outcome? Maybe, but you're kind of paying for that in how steep the odds are. I'm not a lover of the props on this fight. I would give them a miss. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. If you did, please hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already. It's a very complex, deep card this weekend where we need to go into a lot of depth on these fights because of how deep and interesting they are. Hopefully we'll be able to turn the work we've put in the research in these fights into profits in live betting this weekend. So now let's break down the next fight on this card between Dustin Stoltzfus and Punahele Soriano. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Soriano is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.31, which is going to be minus 323 for an implied probability of 76%. If we take a look at the odds on Dustin Stoltzfus, he's around an average of 3.50, which is going to be plus 250 for an implied probability of 29%. And whenever I see a guy like Punahele Soriano that has such deep flaws in their overall fighting style, whenever I see guys like this as a big favourite, it always gets my spidey senses tingling. Because from my perspective, guys like Soriano that have such big weaknesses in their skill set, in their overall package, should never really be in this odds range as a big favourite, because anyone they face could potentially make Soriano pay for the issues that he has, and we'll obviously get into what those issues are as we work through the breakdown. In terms of the X factors and the size difference and all that stuff between these two, Stoltzfus is 32 years old, 6 foot tall with a 75-inch reach. Punahele Soriano, 31 years old, 5'11" with a 72.5-inch reach. So we can see both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size, nothing major there. Stoltzfus with a bit of a reach advantage, but in the context of this fight, don't think it's going to mean a whole lot because he doesn't really know how to use it. So this is a super interesting matchup because Punahele Soriano is one of these guys that is very, very good everywhere. He's got a collegiate wrestling background. He's a very good wrestler, very good MMA grappler. He's strong, he's powerful, he's physically imposing, and he's also very aggressive on the feet. He's got true legit knockout power, dynamite in his hands. He's fast, he's accurate, and that's the reason why he's got so many knockout wins on his record. But the story with Soriano is always the same. He's very good early and then fades very quickly as the fight wears on. Now Soriano is one of these guys that, because of how tough he is, and because he gasses in every fight, being tired is very much in his comfort zone. So he's one of these guys that doesn't totally capitulate when he gets tired. Like there's some guys like a Terence McKinney that when they get tired, they just completely capitulate and fall apart. And then there's other guys like Punahele Soriano that just is used to gassing out in every fight. So he kind of just accepts that he's going to be very, very tired in the second half of all of his fights, and he just tries to push through and tough it out and get on with it. And I really like that about Punahele Soriano, because when you look at him in matchups like when he fought Brendan Allen is a really good example. Even when he was gassed out of his mind in that third round, and you know Allen was hammering him with those body kicks and Allen didn't look like he'd slowed at all, Soriano was still in the fight, still looking dangerous, still doing damage, still landing big shots, just by being gritty, tough, determined, and having a really strong will to win. So fighting tired is definitely in Soriano's comfort zone, and I like that about him. And this is one of those matchups where, when you look at how Stoltzfus and Soriano match up from a stylistic point of view, technically, Soriano is better than Dustin Stoltzfus in every single aspect of MMA. There's no doubt about it. He's tougher. He's more durable. His striking is significantly better. His MMA grappling is significantly better. Takedown offense better. Grappling control better. Everything's better. Soriano's better than Stoltzfus everywhere. The only area of, or the only advantage that Stoltzfus has in this fight is cardio, which makes this fight extremely interesting, because while Stoltzfus is very likely to struggle very, very bad early on because his takedown offense is bad, Soriano's a strong offensive wrestler, and Stoltzfus doesn't move his head much, and he's slow on the feet, and his striking defense is bad. And Soriano has got dynamite on it in his hands. He hits like a truck. I mean, look at all the first round knockouts he's got, first round finishes he's got. Right, he's a very dangerous guy in round 1. So Stoltzfus will be in a lot of trouble early. He'll be a sitting duck on the feet. I think Soriano's going to be able to do whatever he wants to Stoltzfus on the ground. This is one of those fights where if Stoltzfus can make it through the first round, things will become very, very interesting. But this is where the devil's in the detail. This is where the fight research is very important. This is where we have a huge edge in live betting UFC. This is a very complex fight because we've seen Stoltzfus slow down a lot in fights. We've seen Stoltzfus make a lot of mistakes on the ground. He was in total control against Gerald Meerschaert until getting caught in a crazy position in round 3 and submitted. So this is one of those fights where you really need to understand both these guys on a very deep level to assess what is going on in a matchup like this as it unfolds, as it happens. And I've done the research to put myself in a position where I have a very good read on these two. In terms of how I see this from a betting point of view, all the value is with Stoltzfus. There's no doubt about it. You'd be crazy to bet a guy like Soriano in this odds range that slows down as much as he does. However, with how bad Stoltzfus' takedown defense is and how weak he's looked off his back at times, even if Soriano is completely gassed out of his mind, with that collegiate wrestling background, even a gassed out Soriano in round 3 might still be able to get Stoltzfus down in round 3 and kind of cruise from top control and run the clock down. So it's a very, very complex fight. The value does lie with Stoltzfus. If you really want to bet this fight, it is a dog or pass matchup. There's no doubt about that. But because of how badly he's likely to struggle early on, because of how bad his striking defense, how bad his takedown defense is, if you do bet Stoltzfus this weekend, you are putting your money in a lot of danger. So just be careful of that. Now, in terms of the over-under on this one, I guess the odds are leaning more towards fight not to go to a decision, because with Soriano being a big favourite, the betting market this weekend just assumes that Soriano is going to kill Stoltzfus in round 1. Personally, I would look a little bit contrarian and maybe look towards the fight going deeper if Stoltzfus can make it through the early storm, because we know Stoltzfus is improving from fight to fight, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility of him getting caught cold and death shotted like he did against Abus Magomedov in his last fight. So I'm not going to be betting the over-under on this one myself, but I think the value lies more towards the overs on this one. In terms of the props, again, I would be contrarian on... Actually, the odds on Stoltzfus to win by decision aren't that much better than Stoltzfus to win money line, so I wouldn't actually bother with that. Stoltzfus to win in round 3 is very interesting. He's not that dangerous. He's not really a finisher. And Soriano is tough as nails, not easy to get out of there. But we know Soriano gets very tired, so Stoltzfus to win in round 3 odds are like 26.0 plus 2,500. That is super interesting to me. That is very, very, very interesting to me. So you might want to take a look at that. Again, not something I'm going to be betting myself. I don't bet props, but that is an interesting one. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. If you did, please hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. And check out my website, MMABettingTips.com. If you like these breakdown videos, you want to watch breakdown videos for all the prelim fights on this card in the same amount of detail that we went into these main card fights, head on over to my website, MMABettingTips.com. For now, have a great week. Hope you crush it this weekend and make loads of money. Be back next week with another breakdown video for next week's card. Nice one, guys. Take care. Love you all. Bye.